First of all, I'd like to welcome everybody who's come today. My name is Brenda Christ, and I'm in charge of programs for the Chesapeake chapter. So I would like to alert you to a couple of things. First of all, I'd like to welcome our guests for today. We're going to have David Taylor talking about planning and delivering oral proposal presentations, and his moderator, Beth Wingate. I'm going to turn it over to Beth and David. Thank you very much. Welcome from the Chesapeake chapter.
Welcome, everybody. I'm Beth Wingate, president of Lofel Consulting Group, an APMP fellow, former CEO of APMP International, and former president of the APMP National Capital Area chapter. I've been with Lofel Consulting for 15 years this week, and I've managed proposals for small, mid-size, and large government contractors for over 30 years now, including training teams in proposal best practices, writing sections of the APMP body of knowledge, and co-writing 6 books on capture and proposal best practices. David Taylor is a principal consultant with Lofel Consulting Group, providing proposal and orals consulting. With over 30 years in international high technology businesses, David has experience in engineering, project management, product management, business development, and senior level leadership. In past careers, David has been an airline pilot with British Airways, a director of management information services, and a vice president with a major software manufacturer. David has a diploma in electrical engineering, a master's in business administration, and a PMP certification. David is also an APMP certified proposal professional. So David, let's jump into the content of our discussion today.
Thank you, Beth, and good afternoon to everybody. Thank you for joining us. This is the second session in a 2-part series. Recently, we presented part 1, orals planning. Today, we're going to cover orals delivery and presentation technique with an emphasis on the current trend for virtual orals. I'll also include a few items from the part 1 session on planning where pertinent for orals delivery. So just why do customers want orals? Proposals are not read. This maxim is so true, they're scored. Consequently, I'm going to be focusing a lot on how to maximize the scoring for your orals presentations. I treat them like a job interview, which is exactly what it is. Customers want to meet the real people who are going to actually do the work when you win. And scoring is usually defined in the RFP evaluation criteria. That's a good place to look. So why orals? Why customers want orals? The orals, it's a test drive for the customer, so they can meet us and talk to us. I'm going to apologize to sales and BD and capture colleagues that the customer doesn't want to hear from you. The customer wants to assess themselves that our proposed personnel are truly competent. The customer wants to verify that our proposed team members work together well, and it's especially important if we have key partners. Small things like all wearing the same style name badge, having a common virtual background, and friendly banter among team members also help to reinforce this. The customer wants a comfort level that we're going to be easy to work with. People will buy from people they like. This may sound subjective and unfair, but always remember, the orals is a job interview. Being easy to work with can be reinforced by showing an agenda that exactly matches the instructions we're given. If the customer has 2 or 3 well-qualified top bidders, the orals can help them decide who to go with. So design your orals to maximize scoring against the published criteria. The US government orals, you're going to find that in the evaluation criteria, section M. The US government orals, you should read the relevant part of the Federal Acquisition Regulations, FAR 2015.102. US government evaluators are required to evaluate bidders only against the published criteria. So don't waste time and words on seemingly good information that's not going to help your scoring. So what matters most to the evaluators? In this list of what evaluators look for, I'm always especially tuned into the 4th bullet here. US government evaluators are looking for an exceptional solution offering more than the minimum requirements. This is what they call brings merit and has value. So don't hesitate to emphasize these and help the evaluators to note them. Also, what the evaluators do not want. In this list, pay attention to the first item. Stay focused on presenting only material that resonates with the customer's evaluation criteria. Remember, proposals not read, they're scored. Remember to stay focused on the customer who is always thinking, what's in it for me? Your oral slides have to be 100% consistent with your spoken words and 100% consistent with all written submissions, such as plans for program management, staffing, quality, and risk. The last item in this list of what they do not want is very important. You can finish 10 minutes early, but it can be fatal to be even 1 second over the time limit. Expect that you will be summarily cut off at the end of your allotted time. Polished presenters are great, but remember the customer mostly wants to meet the real people. So something that evaluators need. Keep in mind, the evaluators usually are required to have a record of the presentation, which might not be recorded. In today's webinar, you'll hear me emphasize your delivery technique and speaking pace. If you talk too fast, the evaluators are not going to have enough time to take adequate notes. It's not always fair, but orals are somewhat subjective. People buy from people they respect, people they trust, people they like. Once again, it's a job interview. The major types of orals and their differences are worth looking at. There are many differences and many similarities. There's a big difference between in-person and virtual orals. And there's a difference between US federal government orals and the vast range of classical orals for state and local government, commercial customers, and international customers. With an in-person orals, it's relatively easy to interact with the audience. You can see immediately how you're being received. You can and should make eye contact with every person in the audience. In the photo here, the woman presenting can see and hear acknowledgement from the audience. Since the arrival of COVID, virtual orals have become commonplace. A virtual orals is a very impersonal experience. However, there are techniques that can help you. Looking directly into your camera is a very effective way for you to make eye contact with every member of your virtual audience. But you'll still need to constantly add stimulation and interest in your material to avoid your audience getting distracted or even falling asleep, as you see here. I advocate having a talk track, having a script. You're going to need a script to accompany your slides. I recommend building a talk track for 120 to 135 words per minute. You'll probably see a tendency for presenters to try talking faster. The phenomenon is that presenters who speak the slowest tend to get the most information conveyed. So count the words in your talk track. Divide by 125 for an estimate of how many minutes are needed for each slide. Adjust the number of words to meet your time budget for each slide. Cut out those superfluous words. Manage the timing. And don't fall into the trap of letting undisciplined presenters steal time away from other presenters. You got to be prepared to enforce trimming words to meet the time budget. I strongly recommend speakers having a printed script. If they're nervous, it can be comforting. If they tend to ad lib or go off track, it helps them to keep on message. It makes it easy for a backup presenter to step in. It makes it much easier to manage the timing and not get summarily cut off before you've delivered your final slides. Make it easy for the customer to score you by using the customer's vocabulary from the RFP. Avoid jargon and synonyms. And don't simply read the slide. Introduce it and talk to a few items on the slide. Where you can, embellish what's in the slide. So treat the slide as wallpaper and a backdrop for your interesting personal experience in explaining how and why, not just what. At the bottom of this slide, remember your talk track script is to be spoken. You got to write that script for the ear, not for the eye. You don't have to be 100% grammatically correct, so make your talk track script conversational. I want to talk about my concept of levels 1, 2, and 3 so you don't get stuck down in the weeds. With limited time to present, you cannot spend too much time on very fine detail. You've got to cover as much material as possible in limited time. A good technique is to spend most of your time at a very high level, the 30,000-foot level. I call this level 1. Then once in a while, drop down to that level 2 with a bit more detail, and then get right back up to the high level. Once in a while, drop down in the weeds, down to very fine detail, just to prove you can whenever you choose. This technique maximizes the breadth of material that you can cover in a very limited time and still allows you to demonstrate that you can provide infinite detail whenever you want. A couple little techniques here. I'm revealing slide this gradually You'll see down in the bottom right corner, I've got a little blue triangle there. That tells me I've reached the last click in revealing information on this slide. That helps you get ready to move on to the next slide. Virtual orals. It's tough when you cannot see the audience. I can't see you folks now. But this is the reality with virtual remote orals. With virtual orals, you've got to do all possible to overcome the barriers of it being very impersonal. Just as with an in-person oral, start the presentation by establishing credibility and trust. If you get credibility with the audience, they're going to be much more inclined to listen, watch intently, and believe you. Looking at your camera is the closest you'll get to establishing eye contact with every member on a virtual audience. Do this especially when you want to make a point. If the whole presentation team is on camera, you can help your colleagues by looking interested, smiling, and nodding approval when they make a good point. If the customer specifies what method is going to be used for the virtual oral, such as Zoom, Teams, or Google Meet, use that method for all of your planning meetings and your practice sessions. So get to know the tool you'll have to use. And this is difficult, but always remember to smile while you're on camera. I want you to manage the image that you're presenting and manage what your image is saying. Have your cameras set so that each face fills about 2/3 of the screen with the camera set at eye level. The folks shown here all have their cameras at about the right level, but the impression created by these presenters would be a lot better if that office in the top left was less cluttered. The man top center got a shave and a haircut. We can do that real quick. The man top right was dressed less casual. The lighting eliminated shadows of the woman on the left. The woman right center did not have an oversized microphone and headphones. And they all had a common virtual background, not cluttered bookshelves, more like a neutral setting in the bottom center. And remember, think like it's a job interview. The small screen down in the bottom right corner is the sort of image that you want to be projecting. Some hints and tips for these virtual orals. Your camera should be at face height, not looking down on your head and not looking up at you. Lighting needs to be even so there are no shadows on your face. I usually prefer a virtual background, like Beth and I have been using right now. This can be very easy to do with just a plain color PowerPoint slide and the company logo, as you can see I'm using right now. It overcomes the challenge of seeing messy basements, hotel bedrooms, and cluttered office desks. It also lets you create visible evidence of a cohesive team. Frequently make use of looking directly into the camera to create that illusion of eye contact. If your PC's got a poor microphone, consider plugging in an external microphone. And avoid being surprised by your next slide by using the PowerPoint presenter view so you can see your next slide. There are challenges with virtual orals. In remote virtual oral presentations, we got to work hard to overcome the challenges that come with this style of presentation. It's hard to sustain interest. I recommend rotating speakers, changing your voice modulation, and varying the pace of delivery. If I have some great presenters and some dry presenters, I'll try to interleave them. Every new voice tends to wake up the audience. Unless you're allowed to dialogue with the audience, I don't know of any way to gauge the audience's attention during a virtual presentation. So be aware, as you see on the right here, they might have fallen asleep. But we can help to keep them engaged with attractive, informative slides and judicious use of highlighting, bold, and color. Help the audience to navigate your slides. A little animation such as revealing lines can be very useful. It's easy for the audience to lose track of who's speaking. So you use photos of the speakers if you don't have cameras on. Use transition slides to explain the change of topic and introduce a new speaker. There's lots of ways to do that. Here's one way down the bottom right corner. If I were going to change presenter, I could put the name of the next presenter and the topic I'm going to segue to, just to give the audience a heads up we're changing speakers. More challenges, virtual orals, there are lots of them. Check out the IT environment and equipment of every presenter in advance. Before this webinar, we did a test session yesterday to make sure we understood all the IT aspects, and then another session just before we started today. Is bright sunlight or dark shade a challenge for you? Does the presenter's location sound like an echo chamber? Is the background cluttered? A uniform virtual background for all presenters reinforces the perception that the presenters are a cohesive team, even if they've never before all worked together. If you do an IT check early with each presenter, you'll have time to provide presenters with anything needed, such as a new PC, a new camera that can be positioned at eye level, an external microphone, or a ring light to eliminate shadows. A $12 ring light is an excellent remedy for poor lighting. I'll show you an example, say it later. Expect there are going to be internet drops. Plan for it, so that when it happens, it does not destroy your presentation. Have backup speakers ready to jump in at any time with the script ready. In some cases where I found a presenter to have poor local internet, the remedy has been for them to use a hotel room. Above all, you've got to manage the timing. It's highly likely that you will be cut off at the exact second your allotted time ends. I once did an orals where the evaluators literally stood up and left the room while I was mid-sentence. Don't let that happen to you. Practice so you're certain you will complete your closing slide at exactly 30 seconds before the time expires. I want you to practice until you get timing absolutely perfect. Perfect timing sends a message to the evaluators that you are compliant and are competent in managing a schedule. It demonstrates that you are honoring their schedule. Perfect timing protects the time you need for a powerful close. And aim for that pace of about 120 to 135 words per minute. And then ruthlessly chop words to get down to your word budget. And do this by carefully selecting just a few items on a slide to talk about that resonate with the evaluation criteria. So another reason for a slower pace of delivery is to give time for the evaluators to take notes. Give them time to write down your strengths, your win themes, your discriminators. And at each practice session, note the time taken for each slide, and then adjust the words that are needed. You can plan and visualize the timing and number of slides with a simple Excel table and automatically generated pie chart. The presentation opens with what I call a grabber to grab the audience's attention. It then proceeds section by section according to your agenda, and then it closes with a summary and that call to action, the powerful close. But perhaps the most crucial section to manage is the topic immediately before the summary and call to action. This is where the speaker needs to be adept at abbreviating material being presented if you're running late, or having extra material if you're ahead of schedule, and vigorously protecting the minutes needed for that powerful close with the summary and the call to action. Record your practices whenever you can. I recommend at least 6 full practice runs, including a question and answer session. So this table has columns to keep track of the exact timing for each slide. This gives you the tools needed to achieve that perfect timing. You can see here my presenters were on target for timing with slides 1 through 8 up here in runs 1 and 2. The presenter for slides 51 to 55 had a target of 5 minutes and took 11 minutes in run number 1, 7 minutes over budget. But in run number 2, that presenter improved, being just 2 minutes over budget. This technique helps to protect the time for your conclusion and ending right on time. And don't fall into the trap of letting overzealous presenters steal time from other presenters. This works best with a timekeeper, assigned for the practice runs and to manage the timing on the day. Practice sessions, you've got to have them. As well as helping to perfect the timing, having multiple full practice sessions also helps to ensure your presenters come across to the audience as a cohesive functioning team and not just a group of disjointed individuals. With at least 6 full practice sessions, you're going to manage the timing to finish with 30 seconds to spare, and you're going to show the customers that you have honored their requirements. Essential for this is to practice using the same medium that you're going to use on the day. Finally, I strongly recommend practicing your technique for succinctly answering difficult questions. So for effective practice, find a practice environment that mimics as close as possible the environment you're going to use on the day, be it the tools such as Zoom, Skype, or Teams, or a physical meeting room for live. Then ruthlessly count the number of words you're going to say for each slide. Stick to that 120 to 135 words per minute, and then check the actual timing on each practice run. And then trim the words to meet your time budget at 120 to 135 words per minute. Plan for at least that 6 full practice runs, including answering the questions. Now is the time to practice handling difficult and embarrassing questions. Just as with a written proposal, hold a red team review for the orals. And above all, ensure your primary presenter and timekeeper protect the time you're going to need for a powerful close and ending with that 30 seconds to spare. You might find yourself doing preparation and practice on the road. If your team has to travel to deliver orals, arrive in town with the whole team a few days early. Rent a hotel meeting room. I advocate a room big enough to mimic the environment you're going to present in. And on the right, top right here, a U-shaped table setup works very well. Ask the hotel to make sure you have power outlets and Wi-Fi access. I usually ask for a room that will hold at least 20 people. In the bottom right here is a photo of a cramped practice room that I had to use in New York City. It was in the basement of a hotel. It was the largest conference room they had. It was the best I could get, but it was very far from ideal. There was not enough table space with little room for PCs, monitors, and books. Ensure if you can, the hotel's got a business center in case you need to print anything. Don't skimp on the hotel. Also keep in mind, your competitors might be using the same hotel. That happened to me more than once. So ask the hotel not to put your name on their signage. No point telling the competitors that you're there. I advocate bring in the catering. It costs a little bit of money, but it helps you to keep your team intact and stops them from disappearing for a 2-hour lunch when you'd rather have them practicing. And get to meet the hotel banquet manager. The banquet manager and his staff can be your best friends. A $50 tip to the banquet manager goes a long way towards getting you all the resources you might need. I want to talk about presentation technique and style. This is really getting now above and beyond the planning stage. Remember, you're a subject matter expert, not a polished TV presenter. Key to delivering your message is being effective and finishing right on time and get your pace correct. If you manage the number of words you try to say and can keep the pace between that 120, 135 words per minute, you are going to finish on time and your audience will be able to comprehend and absorb what you say. You can add interest by varying your pace and your tone of voice. You can help yourself by writing for the ear, not for the eye, and eliminating words that you find hard to pronounce. And always remember, people buy from people they respect, trust, and like. So don't forget to smile as often as you can. If you look at the first 4 bullets here, which one are you? Do you tend to speak fast? Do you tend to overrun the time you're given? Do you tend to run short? Do you tend to be nervous? If any of these presenters is you, try some of these ideas to enhance your presentation style. For example, if you're a compulsive fast talker, maybe don't try to change your pace. Instead, inject a pause between sentences. It can have the same effect. A lot of people tend to go slower on the day. Avoid the temptation to add more words. Stick to your script and practice at least 6 times to get the timing consistent. And help your audience by giving them a few moments to absorb each new slide before you start talking. When a new slide comes up, count 1, 2, 3, then start talking. The audience is going to appreciate it. Talking about personal style. Early on in the planning and practice sessions, decide on a cohesive dress style for the team. Follow the lead of your customer. If they dress casual, then maybe forego the jackets and ties. I've done presentations in Arizona and in the Middle East where jackets and ties are just not appropriate. Company logo clothing can sometimes work well for technical folks in your presentation team. Early in my sales career, I was advised that some people like beards, some people do not. I had a beard. If you don't have a beard, it's never an issue. Evaluators can make unfair, subliminal value judgments, so help them make the right judgments. Virtual or in person, you can use eye contact to create the impression of visually greeting each person in the audience. Make actual eye contact if you're in person, and look into the camera if you're virtual, and then smile, like that smiley face up top. Put a smiley face on your screen. You should never be underdressed compared to your customer. So find out how they dress normally so you could be part of their team. I want to talk about personal style for a little bit, how you come across. If you're doing a live orals, have a monitor facing you so you don't have to turn your back on the audience to see your slides. Minimize distractions such as heavy jewelry, coins and keys in your pockets, and pacing back and forth. Figure out what to do with your hands. Choose your stance, whether live, face-to-face, or virtual. No defensive posture, no slouching, no fidgeting. Look engaged the whole time, both when you're presenting and when colleagues are presenting. A useful stance in the bottom right here, a useful stance is to anchor one foot on the ground, rest one hand in a pocket, and then gesture with the other hand. If you're a pacer, that really helps you to anchor yourself and stop annoying the audience. A way to think about managing the flow. You've got to help the audience keep track of the slides. Some may be following along with hard copy. Some may be watching on an iPad or on a smartphone. So tell them what slide number you're addressing. Consistently use the terminology in the RFP, not your internal alternative phraseology or jargon. And then simply say next slide to have your slides advanced. You want to keep the transition time slide to slide to an absolute minimum so you can maximize your content. So keep the transitions from speaker to speaker clean and crisp. Don't waste time with lengthy transitions. Aim for just 5 to 10 seconds to transition speakers. I recommend you use PowerPoint's presenter view. I'm using that right now, shown here in the bottom right corner. You can see on the left the slide that I'm showing right now, and there's a small heads up on the slide that I'm going to have next. It helps me to stay ahead of my script. So here's the next slide. Audience interaction, and talk about the question and answer session. The evaluators want to meet you. US government orals evaluators are usually constrained to remain silent while you present. An exception is an OTA, other transactional authority procurement, where the rules are much more relaxed. In that case, they can interact with you during your presentation. In a state and local government or commercial or international orals, you might be able to engage the audience while you present. And that's very beneficial because you can generally get a lot more information across. In most cases, you're going to be expected to respond to questions at the end of your presentation. You're going to have to handle interruptions, disruptions, and questions. In all cases, be sure that you maintain control of your presentation. Keep an eye on the clock to ensure that you will finish right on time. And I always assume there's at least one evaluator who wants my competitor to win. So don't get rattled by anybody in the audience venting or trying to disrupt you. A useful technique for this is to let the person vent for a minute and then visibly acknowledge and park the issue on a flip chart, promising to respond with an answer in due course. Then get back on track. Sometimes those hard questions might be designed to help you. Remember, the evaluators have seen all the proposals and they want to give you an opportunity to shine compared to the others. Be sure to practice those difficult and potentially embarrassing questions, such as any poor past performance. Assume the evaluators are aware of your weaknesses and may want to hear your explanations. For your practice sessions, it's useful to have a very large bank of sample questions. I aim for having at least 100 questions in my bank. Then in every practice session, use 10 of them. Practice the art of hearing the questions, formulating a succinct answer, and then delivering the answer. So managing the Q&A session. You need to adapt to what the customer wants to do for questions. You might get questions in advance, by email, or read to you. If the latter, I recommend you have one person to chair your team's receipt and handling of the questions. The program manager is ideal. Be sure you fully understand each question. If the clock starts when you start your answer, take as much time as needed to have the question repeated so you fully understand it. There's a hint there, that little green thing. It can buy you more time to make sure your team can start working on the answer to the question while you're getting the nits sorted out to make sure you fully understand the question. The next slide, I'll talk about caucusing to develop your answers. That's often allowed. I do recommend succinct answers. Avoid giving lengthy answers to short questions. And if you get multi-part questions, ensure you answer every single part of the question. And then avoid asking if you answer the question. I prefer to just move on to the next question. Sometimes, like a FedSim, you'll be given a 30-minute caucus time for your team to caucus on the questions that you've received. So if you're given, say, 30 minutes to develop your answers, have a methodology for how you're going to handle that 30 minutes to use the time very efficiently. Have someone on your team be a scribe to capture the questions. Type them out. Probably expect 4 to 6 questions. When you practice, do it with 8 to 10 questions. Read back each question to ensure it was captured correctly, and the team can start working on question 1 while the remaining questions are being provided. The clock starts when you've correctly captured all the questions. So then you've got to quickly assess, are the questions simple or complex, parse them out. What I recommend is dividing the questions out amongst your team members to work on them, and then work individually up to the 15-minute point, and then have the team caucus to assess progress on answering each of the questions. At about the 20-minute point, hand back to the team lead, give the team lead the draft answers to the questions, and then have the team lead start practicing presenting the answers. And then at the 30-minute point, you're ready to go back to the customer and say, we're ready to give you our response. Use that 30 minutes as efficiently and effectively as you possibly can. Let's switch to talking about logistics. My goal with logistics is to make sure there are no surprises on the day. It sounds easy, but it takes a lot of contingency planning to be 99% sure of a flawless orders. So you've got to anticipate. This requires anticipating everything that could be needed or could go wrong. If you're doing on-site or remote orals, check well ahead of time how you're going to get access to where you need to be. I once stayed in an airport hotel for an orals being held at the airport, only to discover that to get from the hotel to the orals was a 30-minute walk, with binders, laptops, and equipment to carry. Plan ahead. Use this list here as a start for your checklist. For example, you've got to know who will run and advance the slides for you. If you're doing a remote virtual orals, ensure you get a test run at least a day ahead. Checking just 30 minutes before the presentation leaves you no time to fix any problems with connectivity. I recommend name tags. Prep your presentation team to visibly appear as a cohesive team. If you have multiple companies in your team, it creates a strong visual image to have either common team-themed name badges for an on-site presentation or a common team-themed virtual background for a virtual presentation. For live presentations, I prefer to pass the handouts at the start of the session. If the projector fails, you can simply revert to the handout for hard copy. If the presentation room has some bad sight lines, the audience members can follow along with the slides in the hard copy. If the audience does not have English as the first language, they can follow the slides in the printed version very easily. For an in-person presentation, think about all the equipment that can help. The soft-spoken technical experts, I've had a few of those. I've done very well by ensuring they have a microphone and an audio system to ensure they can be heard. For everything, have backup alternatives planned for everything you possibly can. Backup speakers, backup PCs, backup projectors, backup internet connectivity. No surprises on the day. If you're going to be traveling, if your presentation team has to travel to the customer site, rent that conference room at a local hotel for your final practice sessions. Bring in the catering for breaks and lunch. It prevents people wandering off that 2-hour lunch. Ask the hotel not to put your company name on the hotel signage. Your competitors might be in the room next door. That's happened to me. And that $50 tip to the banquet manager goes a long way to getting whatever you need. If your team is all flying in to different places, keep a note of their flight reservations. Know their flight number, their hotel reservation number, their room number, just in case you need to contact them. Sometimes you're going to have to submit a copy of your orals with your proposals. You may have to give a hard copy to the customer. In the final edit, focus first on fixing anything that's wrong. Don't fret about anything missing in the hard copy. You can add it in your script. I like to use half-inch D-ring binders. The D-rings tend not to tear pages, and the binder contents can be easily updated if you need to. If you're on the road, no way you can get material printed. I often carry a portable printer and reams of spare pre-punched paper. As mentioned a few slides ago, I like to distribute handouts ahead of the presentation. There are valued arguments against this, but I think the advantages of having the handout beforehand outweighs the disadvantages. And if you pass out handouts to your presentation, don't forget to pick up the spare copies at the end of the presentation. When you come to edit the slide deck, in the edit of your slides, ensure that your strengths and win themes are presented as often as possible. Ensure a totally uniform look and feel for your slides. This really helps the audience to quickly absorb the new information on each slide. Proposals where your entire technical management proposal is contained in the slides, your slides will be very dense. These are FedSim style orals. You have to cram in as much as you possibly can to prove 100% compliance. But in the oral presentation of the slides, focus on talking mostly only about the strengths and the win themes that elevate you from being compliant to compelling. You can refine your talk track right up until the time you present. And I strongly recommend having scripts. They need to be edited. Remember, the script is written for the ear, not for the eye. It should be conversational. The font should be large enough that it can be read while you're presenting. A little segue here to international multilingual presentations. For international multilingual presentations, I've had great success by keeping all documents bilingual. If you have English and the other language in the same physical document, it makes version control much easier. Having interpreters is invaluable. And you can make this successful by using interpreters who have the right technical vocabulary. Having conversational skills is not what you need. You need interpreters who have the technical vocabulary. Give them your script well in advance so they can make sure they can cover all the words you've got in your script. So you've got to freeze that script as early as you can. If you're doing an international multilingual presentation, when you're speaking, pause after each phrase or short sentence to let the interpreter talk. Use short sentences that are grammatically correct. Avoid long sentences and parenthetical phrases. They are very hard to translate. I like a style where I present a sentence in English, and then the interpreter does the non-English version. And you've got to resist using jargon that is hard to translate. And if you're doing international travel, don't forget, you might need to get a visa, and it might take weeks to get that visa. At the table, I like to have an interpreter next to every member of my presentation team. Use your local colleagues to do this. Be very careful to observe all local customs and protocols. This book, Kiss, Bow, Shake Hands, is an excellent reference to find the key local customs in about 60 countries around the world. In the Middle East, nodding the head can mean, I'm sorry, the answer is no. In South Korea, I learned that writing names in red ink is reserved for the deceased. If you're traveling to a new country to present, go out to Amazon, spend the $12 and get a copy of Kiss, Bow, Shake Hands. It's an excellent reference book. Change the subject, demonstrations. I don't like demonstrations. Be very, very wary, be careful. But sometimes a demonstration is required. They do scare me. I avoid them as much as possible, and I'm very careful if they're needed. Have a detailed script, and do not underestimate how long it takes to do a successful demo. Keep your system as self-contained as possible. If you need external connectivity, test that connectivity way in advance. And as you go through a demonstration, explain the setup and what you're going to demonstrate. Explain each keystroke. Explain what you expect for the results, and then explain the actual results and what you've proved. And practice as many times as you can. And just in case, down the bottom here, have a canned video or a PowerPoint version just in case. Here's a sample of a virtual demonstration that I had to do. We used a very large conference room, and we sequestered one half of the room on the bottom left corner here as hot. The customer could see it on the presentation. And the other side, top right corner here, was the cold side, where we had the staff who were helping to run the demo. The presenter stood right in front of this large blue device here and had a monitor right in front of him so the presenter could see what was being presented to the audience. We had key speaking points out of camera sight posted on the back wall to help the presenter. We used multiple cameras showing different views. The presenter used a lapel microphone, and there was a speaker to hear any inputs from the audience. The tables were dressed to hide all the wires. Do not underestimate the complexity and time needed for a simple live demonstration. On the day, an idea I often promote is running a promotional screensaver in the 10 minutes before your presentation starts. It's free time. Use that time to do anything to help engage the audience. And remember, we're subject matter experts, not professional presenters. This may sound contradictory, but relax and exude confidence. And the audience is going to warm up to you the more you can smile. Be approachable. On the day, be on time. Be early. Take advantage of any allowed setup time. That's the time to get out and meet the people you're presenting to, if it's in person. Especially for that in-person orals, make full use of all that free time you can before the clock starts. Task your team members to break out and talk one-on-one with members of the customer's team. Have your PM talk to the customer's program manager. Have your finance person talk to the customer's finance person. Have your security expert talk to the customer's security expert. And make sure your customer can see your name badge, remember who you are. Instead of taking time to pass out business cards, I put them into the handout binder. And be very strategic who sits where. Don't leave it to chance that someone sits in the wrong position. If any action items come up or there's a chance for a follow-up meeting, obtain concurrence to that meeting in advance. You've got to take good notes and keep track of action items. Having good notes for the meeting is most valuable. So assign somebody to be the note taker. Make note of the names and roles for all the customer attendees. And do not hesitate to pause the meeting if you've got to capture an action item. And agree on any follow-up, especially if a best and final offer is going to be expected. After the orals, as soon as possible after the orals is done, document the results and the action items. Review and update the notes taken by your note taker. Learn as much as possible to make your next orals even better. And don't hesitate to ask the customer for a debrief. Start now to build your action plan for the next orals. So wrapping up, some top do's and don'ts. Do show you fully understand the requirements and all risks are mitigated. Do sell your people. People buy from people they respect, trust, and like. Don't spend time on anything that cannot be scored by the evaluators. And don't go even 1 second over the time limit. The evaluators want to meet the real people who are going to do the work. So show passion and caring with personal anecdotes and stories to make a persuasive presentation. How are you going to be scored? In the orals, we want to elevate our proposal from compliant to compelling and help the evaluators justify a perfect score against the published evaluation criteria. That concludes the presentation I've got. So I'll hand back to Beth, and we're happy to take any questions.
Great. Thank you, David. Wonderful advice and information and takeaways. We've received a number of questions from the participants, so let's start off on the questions. First up, how do you handle staff members who are poor presenters?
It happens on almost every team I've coached. There's somebody who's not a really strong presenter. I do one-on-one coaching with the poor presenters on how to improve by looking at what their problems are. I get them to focus on material they're most comfortable with. I help them eliminate words and phrases they find hard to pronounce. And when I'm strategizing the order of people to present, I intersperse strong presenters and weak presenters. So you never have a weak presenter following a weak presenter. You are going to have them. Ideally, you want everybody having a TV presenter personality, strong presentation, and do practice one-on-one with those poorer presenters.
Yep, practice, just like we did.
Mm-hmm.
How do you handle a computer or an IT glitch during a presentation, as in the case of a slide freezing or a presenter whose system crashes?
It happens to me. You've got to have backup plans, plan A, plan B, plan C, and you've got to have backup presenters ready to go. That's one of the reasons I strongly advocate having a script and sticking to it and defining up front who the backup is for each presenter. And then you give it about 5 seconds maximum, somebody drops off and the backup person jumps in and you don't miss a heartbeat. You can revert, if you're doing a live one with a projector, if you've handed out a copy of your presentation in advance, you can revert back to the hard copy. Ensure you've got robust IT and internet for all presenters. I do one-on-one checks with all my presenters ahead of time to check out their internet connectivity. And in one case, I told someone, you don't have good internet in your house, go to a hotel, rent a room for the day. And then practice. Do a practice run using the backup speakers.
Exactly. And sometimes having a wired connection instead of wireless helps a lot.
Yep.
In my experience. If somebody misses a key point, is it okay for the next person to make it?
I'd say yes, if you can do it delicately, such as an additional point to consider is whatever you want.
Mm-hmm.
That you can actually turn that into a positive experience by showing you've got a cohesive team who work together. And then avoid missing points. The best way is to have a script and practice at least 6 times and stick to the script.
Right. What happens if the presentation runs long? What should you cut to ensure you allow time for a summary at the end? And then I'm going to have a backup or a second question after that.
I think there are lots of ways you can do that. I come back to having a script and practicing at least 6 times to make sure you got the timing perfect. And be firm on sticking to that 120 to 135 words per minute. If you look at how I've presented today, I'm probably running about 145 words per minute. A professional presenter will go up to 160, 165 words per minute. If you're not professional presenters, that 120 to 135 words per minute helps you stay right on time. Have a timekeeper tracking the timing from the start to the end, then plan ahead of time what words, sentences, or phrases you can cut out if you're running behind. And that's especially important for that last 20% of the presentation where you really got to protect that last few minutes of your closing slide.
And follow-up question is, do you recommend a person giving a signal to indicate like 1 minute left, or do you think that's distracting?
I recommend having a back channel going the whole time. If you're face-to-face, you can give hand signals. If it's virtual, have a back channel so your team can talk to each other without the customer hearing, and then don't be using it too much, but constantly giving guidance to the presenters. You're ahead, you're behind, speed up, slow down. Give signals that way. Yes, definitely give signals.
Okay, great. Thank you. You mentioned the importance of proposal strengths. How do you ensure you're adding all of your scoreable strengths into your oral presentation?
You've got to be methodical in how you analyze the instructions and the evaluation criteria to ensure you've covered absolutely everything. And then you've got to build a strengths list to align it with those evaluation criteria. Remember, proposals are not read, they're scored. You've got to focus on what's going to allow the evaluators to score points for you. So wherever you can, include your strengths in the oral slides. Make them a central point in the slide wherever you can. Use graphics, maybe an icon, a muscle symbol or something like that, or a strength symbol to point out, hey, this is a strength, score it as a strength. And you can change the tone of voice to really emphasize something. And I always remember this, for every strength you've got, you're claiming, You've got to have a proof point. You've got to be able to prove it.
Right.
No arm wave.
And that just makes it so much stronger, the proof.
Mm-hmm.
What do I do if someone's internet cuts out and we lose the feed during a live orals?
I recommend you practice for that. It'll happen. Once again, I come back to having a written script and knowing who is the backup presenter for each and every slide. If the primary presenter appears to be missing in action, wait about 5, no more than 10 seconds, and then the backup presenter jumps right in and carries on with the script. And then if the primary presenter can get back online, carefully select when they pick up at the next slide. But be ready for that all the time. It's a very real possibility, and it happens. Also, I recommend having one of your team connected as an attendee out of the room so they can detect when one of your team drops offline. Have one of your team, one of your staff people out of the room as watching as an audience member, and then use that back channel for team coordination.
I've used that frequently over my career. An iPad, an iPhone, sometimes multiple, and friends or colleagues planted. Yep. That can save you. What do you do during the Q&A session if one of your team gives an answer you know is wrong?
Good point. That's a tough one. Maybe offer additional information. Maybe use your backup channel, your back channel, to quickly coordinate with the team on what do we do. Maybe just let it go. The answer probably depends on how serious the error is. I usually like to have a corporate executive as part of my orals team, such as a CEO or a division general manager, with responsibility and authority to be definitive. And such an executive can, at the orals, can endorse win themes and strengths and can step in if something has to be corrected. It's a value judgment. That's a tough one.
Okay. You say to use all the screen real estate available if you're doing a FedSim proposal. How do I know what part to talk about and focus on when I'm briefing that slide?
Yeah, sometimes the oral slides are the technical and management proposal. Sometimes the customer, and FedSim does this all the time, the customer asks you to submit your technical proposal in an orals format. And in that case, you've got to cram in everything you possibly can on the slide to be compliant. But not everything in there is going to be scoreable. Not everything in there resonates with the evaluation criteria. So assume the majority of your slide content is there to be compliant with the instructions. And then choose what you're going to talk about by focusing on the evaluation criteria, proving your strengths, mitigating any weaknesses, and then proving you've got 0 deficiencies. It might just be about 10% or a fraction of what's on each slide. Focus on your methods, your proof points, and the items that elevate you from being compliant to being compelling. And if you've designed the slides well, you'll have the evidence for that down in the tagline or maybe in call-out boxes.
And sort of a related question, is it okay to have team members interrupt so they can provide an example of the topic the speaker is presenting on?
If you have practiced at least 6 times, your team will gel and there will be banter across the team. I recommend doing that if you've practiced enough times. It really reinforces to the customer that you are a cohesive, functioning team and you work well together. Oftentimes when we do proposals, we're meeting people for the first time. We haven't worked with those companies before, but you want to present to the customer that we work together well and we are a team. So sometimes, yes, I think that can be good.
When doing presentations on the various commercial platforms out there, Zoom, WebEx, Teams, GoToMeeting, etc., where every viewer's screen can look different from each other's, how do we make sure the audience sees what we want them to see? For example, our visual presentation and the person or the team doing the speaking at that moment.
You can start the presentation by telling the audience the optimum view setting. You could tell them, for this system, you're going to get the best view by doing this selection and what you see. But it can be worse than that. You've got to assume there might be some folks who are watching your slides on an iPhone or using printed hard copy. If I've got color slides, I always do a test run printing those color slides in black and white. to see how they come out. So yeah, give your audience guidance up front on how best to see your presentation.
Okay, thank you, David. We received a lot of questions. Thank you very much. David will answer any questions that we weren't able to get to in today's webinar in upcoming Lofeld Insights blog posts. So definitely check our upcoming blogs and our e-briefs. And we'll make the recording from today's webinar available in the next week or so. So final thoughts on today's webinar and sources of additional information. You can visit our website for our blog posts, free replays of our business winning webinars, other articles, and information about upcoming classes. You can also get information on how Lofeld Consulting can help your proposal writing teams. And most importantly, we're also working on our new orals class that will be debuting in 2023. So keep an eye out for announcements about that class. Thank you for joining us today, everyone, and back to you, Brenda.
Well, thank you, David and Beth. This has been a wonderful presentation today, really packed full of solid information we can use. And for everybody who's attended, thank you very much. And if you don't have an APMP home, please consider the Chesapeake chapter. We're a very friendly organization here, and we'd love to meet you. Have a great day, everybody. Goodbye.